Hey, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video and welcome to a new series that I am calling Quick Tip, where I will basically be telling you guys some quick tips. Very inspiring name, I know. In this video, guys, I want to share with you what are called extension tubes, also sometimes called extension rings, macro tubes, macro rings, you name it. They're basically all the same thing. And basically these are these rings that I have in front of me here. And basically what they do is that they will literally sit between your body and your lens. So here I have the lens, here I have the body, and in between I will put one of these rings, for example, like that. And that way, basically what you're literally doing is you're adding distance between the lens and the sensor in the camera. And the way it works is like fairly complex, like it does some optical magic, and we're not really gonna go there. It's way too complex for this video. But basically what it does is it brings the focusing field of your lens closer. So essentially you're decreasing the minimum focusing distance of your lens. So in other words, you're basically turning your regular, normal, everyday lens into a macro lens, sort of. It's a bit more complicated than that. Now, in the world of macro tubes, you basically have two versions. You have the electronic ones, which are kind of expensive, a couple of $100 usually. And then you have also what I like to call the dumb ones. And that is actually the ones that I have here. I have basically a dumb version. And the electronic ones are rings that actually have, like the name suggests, electronics in them. And they will make sure that even though you're putting something between your camera and your lens, that your lens will still have full aperture control and autofocus and things like that. Whereas these dumb versions that I have over here do not have that. So it basically completely disconnects your lens from your camera, and that has some problems with it. So the set that I have right here was about like 15 to 20 bucks. And basically it comes with this mounting ring that will attach to your camera body. And then there are 3 rings in between. And then this side will attach to your lens. And so what you can do is you can just put this ring on here directly and you will have a very short macro ring. Or you can add one of these in between and extend the distance between the 2 rings. So you can add one of these, or you can stack them on top of each other to make a really long tube if you want. Now, when I first got these, my first thought was just just put all of them together, make a really long tube, and that way I can make really awesome, incredibly close-up photos. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. So the way I use my macro rings is actually in this setup. So we have got the mounting plate, the thinnest ring, and then the lens mounting plate. And so there isn't a whole lot of extension going on here. And these two I basically just put to the side because I can't use them. They're basically pointless to me. And the reason for this is because my lens that I use for macro photography, which is a 24 to 105 f4 Sigma lens, already has a fairly close minimum focusing distance of about 35 centimeters. If you add too much extension using these rings, you will actually decrease the minimum focusing distance so much that it will actually start focusing inside the lens, which basically means that you can't take any sharp photos at all anymore, and that basically makes it useless, of course. But with this setup, this fairly minimal setup, I can actually take really nice close-up pictures of items that are just in front of the lens, which is really sweet. Now, if you decide to pick up the cheaper, like the dumb versions of these rings, which is the ones that I have here, you actually have to keep a couple of things in mind, because there is no longer any communication between the camera and the lens. Some camera brands and some lenses will behave differently when you do this. For example, on Nikon, when you take off a lens of a camera body, automatically the aperture will shut down to its highest f-stop number. And so basically on this Sigma lens that I'm using right now, if I take off the lens will automatically retract to about f22. And so if I want to use this lens for macro photography, the lens is locked to f22 and there's nothing that I can do about it. except for one thing that I discovered, and that is that the aperture on Nikon lenses is actually controlled on using a lever on the lens mount, and you can physically move this lever around, and that will actually open and close the aperture inside of the lens. And so what I tend to do is literally jam a piece of paper in front of that lever so that it opens up the aperture and it locks in its fully open position, which on this lens is at f4. So that way I can actually take macro pictures at f4. But again, every brand will behave a little bit differently with this. You have to look up online how your lenses behave, or just, you know, try it out for yourself. Take off the lens, see what the aperture looks like, because that can be like a little bit of a deal breaker for these kind of rings. Maybe that means that you are basically forced into buying the more expensive smart rings, the electronic ring. Right guys, so here I'm going to show you guys an example of a before and after picture. So this is a picture of this watch that I'm taking with no extension whatsoever. So this is at the minimum focusing distance of this lens, and it's, you know, it's an okay picture, but it's not amazing. And for example, if I want to make like a detailed close-up of the needle of the watch, because maybe I'm shooting this for a client or whatever and they want some detail shots, then, well, I can't really do that if I don't have any extension tubes, right? I can try cropping the picture, but I would have to crop so much that there is almost no resolution left over, so that's just not ideal. So now let me add the extension tubes, and this is the result. As you guys can see, it is way closer than before, and it looks pretty dang amazing actually. And because these are literally just hollow metal rings, there are no optics inside of these, you're not really hurting your image quality. There basically is no effect on image quality, which is really nice. So yeah guys, as you can see, the result is pretty amazing. Now, I know what you might be thinking if you weren't familiar with these macro rings already. You might think like, oh wow, this is amazing, you know, I will just buy them straight away. Why would anyone consider buying macro lenses when these things exist for 15 bucks? Well, the reason for that is because there are some key differences, and real macro lenses do have some advantages over this approach. For one, and this is a common misconception about macro rings, if you add the extension, you will literally be moving your entire focusing field of the lens forward, which means that yes, you can take close-up pictures, which is nice, but you can no longer focus at infinity. In fact, if I add my extension to my lens, the furthest I can focus is at about 1 meter roughly, but I can't focus any further than that. Whereas a real macro lens still has, you know, full distance focusing capabilities. It can focus really close, but it can also focus at infinity if that's what you want. So in that way, macro lenses are a little bit more versatile. Now, of course, yes, you can take the rings off again and use your lens normally if you want to take a picture further away, but that's just, you know, another step in your workflow, and it might slow you down a little bit. And secondly, of course, you still have full aperture control and full autofocus capabilities if you have a real macro lens. Now, yes, you can sort of get a similar result if you get the electronic rings rather than these dumb versions, but those are kind of expensive, and you know, at that point you're sort of, you know, closing down the gap between getting these electronic rings on your existing lenses or just buying a dedicated macro lens. Not to mention that the optics inside of a macro lens are specifically designed to be extremely sharp and look amazing on really close-up subjects, whereas these generic lenses aren't really designed for close-up photography, so there might be some optical artifacts when you're using it on these extension tubes, because the optics might not be optimized for close-up photography like that. But for the most part, your results should look pretty good. And last but not least, the main reason probably to get a dedicated macro lens over this approach is because this is just a hassle, guys. It's kind of a headache to use. Like I said, on my Nikon, I have to do this whole paper trick. It's kind of finicky. And these rings are not amazing quality. They sometimes get stuck, and it's like, it's not fun to work with, basically. And whereas you don't have any of those issues if you just get a macro lens. So at the end of the day, guys, do I recommend these things? And you know what, for 15 bucks, yes, I definitely do recommend these things. They are a bit of a headache, and I would really only recommend them if you're like a photographer like me who only very occasionally does macro shooting. For me, it's basically perfect because for 15 bucks, I can actually do macro shoots occasionally, and I can offer that to my clients that I can make really detailed close-up pictures of their products, for example. Even though it's not like one of those main things about my photography, I can still, offer that to my clients. And for those couple of times that I have to do a macro shoot, I'm really more than willing to put up with the hassle that it is. But if you are more into macro than I am, and you actually want to make macro pictures more often than that and more like on a daily basis, then I would say stay away from these. Maybe get one of those electronic ones if you're on a tighter budget. But for the most part, I would recommend to get a dedicated macro lens, because that will really give you the best working experience and also just the best optical performance. But yeah, guys, that is basically it for this video. Check out the link in the description to see which ones are the ones that I have. I'm not sponsored or anything, but if you are interested in getting these for Nikon F-mount, then I will be linking these in the description. But anyways, that is it for this video, guys. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.